there is this big mystery around the Vikings in Greenland, which I find fascinating, which has never been solved. And we have this story of a big wedding in a church in southern Greenland on September 16th, 1408. And it was the daughter of an Icelandic chief that was getting married to a man, and they were stuck in Greenland for 3 years because of the Black Death, the plague. And then a ship came, and there was this big wedding in this church, and then they sailed back. No ship came to Greenland for 30 years after that. And when the next ship came, they found no one left. Everyone had disappeared. There was nobody left, and nobody knows still today what happened to the people. There were thousands of people living there, and they just disappeared.
So it was a very big settlement then. It's not like it was a couple hundred people that had outposts.
Well, it was not a very big settlement. I don't know the exact number, but a few thousand people, not tens of thousands, but a few thousand people, maybe 3,000 people, something like that, spread over a relatively large area. But they just disappeared. So we don't know, were they killed by someone? Was there a plague that came and killed everyone? Were there pirates that came and took them as slaves and sailed with them to, I don't know where, Northern Africa maybe? That was happening in the 17th century. This is the 15th century we're talking about. Did they move west? Did they go to America? There are stories of when the French were going through North Dakota in the 17th century. They were going from one native village to another while they were sailing. I think it's, what river is it? Red River? I'm not sure.
I can't remember that.
And they came to a village that was structurally a bit different than the other villages because it was guarded. They had a fence around the village, which was unusual, and the people were blonde and blue-eyed. Were they descendants of the people from Greenland? I have no idea. They died from diseases which the Frenchmen brought with them. So there's nothing left of them today, but it would be an interesting DNA study if you could dig up the bodies of that tribe to see, where did they come from?
Yeah, because even if the original settlement got hit by disease, at least a third of it or something like that would probably still
usually
survive if it's that size.
Usually
right?
It's not everyone that dies.
Right,
A bad plague can kill 1/3 or even half.
Yeah.
But usually not everyone. That's quite fascinating to look at.
That would be, I suppose that's material for an alternate history of America, right? But if you think about how early they were and how that must have shaped and changed all of the social dynamics and just kind of the technological dynamics all across the Midwest and the Great Plains and however far they actually ended up penetrating or kind of sending ripples across the Americas before your Europeans arrived later.
Yeah, I mean we have in Central America stories of this god, with a white beard and the description of that god, it could have been a Viking that got lost and ended up in Central America, or was on an exploration and never came back. Because if he never went back, his saga is not registered. He's just one of those that got lost at sea. But maybe he didn't get lost at sea. Maybe he ended up in Mexico or
I thought this is real warm. This is pretty nice. He wouldn't be the first guy that ended up.
Why go back? I mean, you just found paradise.
I guess that's the other thing that I have to look into a little bit, is getting a feel for how much ground you could cover on one of those boats over a period of time.
Yeah. And that's another thing, because when people were starting to look into those sagas and how far they sailed and etc., they said, and this just doesn't match. It's impossible. They can't have sailed this far. And it's because at that time, most of the ships, we were talking about 15th century, 16th century, etc. Most of those ships were bigger ships. They were big sail ships that were designed to be able to carry a large cargo. because they were sailing across the seas and they were supposed to bring gold and spices and ivory and who knows what back to Europe. The Viking ships are designed completely differently, and they can sail twice as fast as those big cargo ships. So when people were measuring, okay, how far can they sail per day, they were usually not calculating, because they didn't have a replica of the Viking ships at that time. They hadn't found the old Viking ships, which we now have found both in Denmark and Norway. So they didn't have the exact information. Now we do, and we know that those ships sailed much faster across the sea than later time sail ships, because they were much smaller, they were much lighter. They were only designed to carry a minor cargo, usually either wood or livestock, and not some heavy cargo that was being transported across the globe.
Yeah, that was I guess the other side of it that I found fascinating, circling back to the beginning of our conversation, and that using a ship to traverse rivers. And
yes,
right. I know it's done all over, and it has been done for a long time. But going upstream.
Well, the interesting thing is they didn't only cross rivers, because when you think about it, a lot of the Vikings, they went to Kiev in modern Ukraine. And at that time, if we're thinking about the early 11th century, there was a Yaroslav the Wise. He was the Tsar of the Russians. And he had a Swedish princess for a wife, or a Swedish. So there was a strong relationship between the Russians and the Swedes. And there was a lot of communication in between. And when you read about the Icelandic Sagas, if you were a son of a chieftain, you were supposed to go Viking, which means you were supposed to sail abroad and serve a foreign king and become rich and wealthy, and you would come back with all your gold and fancy clothes, and you would live as a king for the rest of your life in Iceland.
A lot different than the modern gap year.
Yeah, quite different. So, and they didn't just go to Denmark or Norway. They did that as well, primarily Norway, but they also went to Sweden, and they went to Yaroslav in Kiev, and they sailed on their boats to Kiev. Now that is impossible. There are no rivers that are to Kiev as such. So they would sail up rivers, either past St. Petersburg and into the country there, or upriver from Riga in modern Latvia and into, which is Belarus today. And then they would cross from one river to the next and over to Dnieper. And they would do that by dragging their boats onto land and tilt it. And then they would put, rafts?
Like some wooden logs? Or,
yeah, wood logs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they would put wood logs. They would have a number of them. And they would line them up. And then they would drag the boat on the logs over to the next river. And the rivers are quite close, and only a few kilometers in between. So they could drag the boats over, and then they would sail downstream from Dnieper and down to Kiev.
And I guess that gets back to the boats, just how incredible the design was on the boats, and the fact that how durable that boat has to be at a.
Yeah, it's quite a sturdy boat.
We got a little hairy guest.
Yeah, somebody needs my attention. He needs to run out to the garden. Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I would love to do a trip like that and sail the rivers and take the same route as they did and see actually how far it is where they crossed and how difficult the terrain is. I've been trying to look at it from Google Maps and see how it is.
That's the next Mongol rally, right?
Yeah,
the Viking trek.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, it would be. A sailing race, upriver and downriver.
Because that tells you how durable those boats were too, and how light they were, right? Because
there's another story, because the most powerful person in the world at that time was the Emperor of Constantinople, and the best Vikings, they would go from the service of Yaroslav in Kiev, and they would go and serve the Emperor of Constantinople, and his lifeguard were Vikings. including in Harald Hardrada, who became later king of Norway. And it's actually quite fascinating that how far they traveled. And I was in Venice a few years ago, and outside the naval headquarters in Venice is a big marble lion, about 2 meters high, and it's huge, it's beautiful. And this lion was taken by the Venetians in the 13th century from the harbor of Piraeus outside Athens, where it had been standing for more than 1,000 years. So it's almost 2,000 years old. Now, one of those lions has a pattern on its neck, and nobody knew what that pattern was until there was a Swedish diplomat in the 19th century that came and he recognized the pattern. It's runes. And when I translate the runes, it's a language that I can still read and understand.
That's incredible.
It's absolutely incredible. And what it says is that we came here to fight a rebellion in Athens. And we stopped it, and to mark the victory, we carved this into the lions, which was quite unpopular. Graffiti.
Rubbing it in a little bit.
Yeah. And they would write that, who was in the team that came to Athens, and they would say, okay, and they mention a few names, and they were led by a guy, they were working for Harald, and then this guy, I don't remember the names of all of them, but one guy couldn't attend because he was on a mission in Bulgaria, and another guy, he couldn't attend because he was on another mission in Armenia. It shows that the Greek Empire, or the Byzantine Empire at that time, was huge. And they were serving for the emperor in all that empire. So the Vikings that were in his service, they were all over the Middle East. And it's crazy to think about 1,000 years ago that some son of an Icelandic farmer would be fighting in Jerusalem or in Baghdad or a place like that.
Yeah, because I think the temptation is that when you're thinking about it, you're like, okay, well maybe they ended up clear down there at some point, but that was a life trip or a life journey to get down there, right? Not, oh yeah, I went down for a couple of years campaign and served as the lifeguard, and then I needed to be king in Norway, back up in Norway, so I had to hop back in my boat and make my way back up.
Yep. And speaking of the light boats, the harbor in Constantinople is famous because nobody could win it. And they had this chain to close the Golden Horn.
Yeah, the famous chain, yeah.
The famous chain, which nobody could pass except Harald Hardrada. Because mysteriously, emperors kept dying on his watch. and on one occasion, he used to rob the gold chambers of the emperor when he died, every time. So he filled his ship with gold and the princess, which he robbed as well, put on his ship, and then he was rowing out the Golden Horn, and they pulled up the chain to close it. And he said, full force ahead, he called to his men. And they sailed towards the chain. And as they came to the chain, all the men were ordered to go back on the boat. So they ran back on the boat, so it lifted on the front and on top of the chain. And then they ran to the front of the boat to get over it. And that's how they got out of the Golden Horn.
It's perfect for a James Bond movie.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely fascinating.
It's just incredible.
Yeah. And you can even see today in Hagia Sophia, which is, in my opinion, the most magnificent building on the planet.
I agree. The history, the dome, everything about it is spectacular.
It's absolutely. And if you go up on the second floor, where you have this balcony where you can see where the emperor used to be, there are these circles on the floor where the emperor was and his 12 disciplines, or whatever they were called, ministers, and the lifeguards would be standing up there, and you can see runes that have been carved in the rail, and it says like Halfdan was here or something like that, normal gravity, like when you look under the table in a classroom. Somebody has written on the bottom of the table. It's It's the same way, and it's more than 1,000 years old. And for me, it's absolutely incredible. Flying to Istanbul, flying 3 hours from Iceland to Copenhagen, then flying 3 hours from Copenhagen to Istanbul. Thousands of kilometers, and to find that my ancestors 1,000 years ago, they were there. And when I'm reading the Icelandic Sagas, there are no buildings left in Iceland where I can see where they were standing. The church is still standing in Greenland, though, where that wedding was in 1408.
Yeah,
that's quite amazing.
Yeah.
It just lacks the roof, but it's there. But in Iceland, there's nothing standing. And then you go to Constantinople, to Istanbul, and you go into Hagia Sophia, and there you can see where they scratch their names. And there's this description of in one of the sagas where this great outlaw was finally killed. After years where they had been chasing him, he got sick and he was finally killed. And the guy who killed him got very unpopular because this outlaw was loved by everyone. It was the bad guy that everybody loved, charming guy, and yeah, sort of like that. And so he fled Iceland to Norway. But this outlaw had a brother in Norway, so he had to flee again from Norway, and he fled to Kiev. And the brother followed him to Kiev. And when he found out, he's in Kiev trying to kill me, he fled to Constantinople. And he went into the service of the emperor. And so the other guy, who didn't recognize him, he didn't know what he looked like, he heard that he had gone into the service of the emperor, so he signed up too. And they were sent out on the first mission, and before they went, they had this thing called vopnathing. It's where they gather and they compare their weapons and say, okay, what kind of weapons do we have, and how are we prepared, etc., etc. And one of these new guys, he comes with this big axe, and it's got this mark in it. And he says, well, this is a very good weapon, and I got it from this strong outlaw in Iceland which nobody could kill until I came, and this is the mark since I killed him. And so they take it one by one, and oh wow, it's an amazing weapon, an amazing story, until the brother gets the weapon, and he said, oh yeah, I knew that guy, and then it chops the head off. And they're like, what are you doing? You can't do that. We're in a civilized place now. And then he was taken and he was thrown into prison, and that prison is still there. Oh, wow. And for me, it's amazing that I can read this story, and it's so far out that he would chase someone from Iceland to Constantinople to get that revenge, and the prison he was in is still standing there. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, because I guess that in a way communicates just how easy. Not that it was easy to transit, but that it wasn't that extreme, or as extreme as we make it in our heads, right?
Yeah, and because when we built nationalism. Because that's what we've been doing for the last 200-300 years. We're building nationalism. We're building this notion of, well, we are the people that have always lived here and always protected this land, etc., etc. It's rubbish. We've always been on the move and mixing and etc., etc. So that's one of the things I love about those stories. It shows how interconnected we have been, not just today when we've got aeroplanes and trains and cars, but for thousands of years, we've been able to travel. It took a little longer, but we did.
Yeah, it really is incredible. Just seeing and also just the threads of each culture and how they kind of interplay together across all of these other cultures, and just all of the influence is amazing.
It's absolutely amazing. And when they're finding in Gotland or in Denmark, those treasures with silver coins and gold coins, and it's a Viking treasure, and they have Arabic coins in it. Or when they find Scandinavian coins in Uzbekistan, it's absolutely amazing. It shows trade has always been going, and we know this about the Silk Route. I mean, the Silk Route is thousands of years old. And we have this notion that nobody knew about China until Marco Polo went there.
Right.
And in a way it's true, but still, people were trading goods all the way from China, and they had maybe no notion of what China really was, but they were still trading goods from there.
No, I know that was listening to the podcast that's been very popular, Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. Yeah. And he has the episodes, The Wrath of the Khans, talking about their influence and how far they pushed into Europe and that side of it.
Yeah.
and for me that was a huge wake up call on just readjusting my perception of historical timelines as well, and then also better understanding why Europe rose to dominance while Asia stuttered, or the Arab world ran into these challenges. So it's but how interconnected it was, especially in the times of those great empires that were trading and really working together very aggressively before the European Dark Ages, right?
Yeah, and I mean, Europe 1,000 years ago was okay, they had some kings, but there was nothing really happening or developing, very little. But if you look at the Arab world at that time, the science that they were working with. There's this guy who was living in Ghazni. And Ghazni, you probably heard quite a bit about Ghazni in the last decade, because it's one of the battlefields of the Afghan war.
Okay.
So today we picture Ghazni as a desert city that is just a shithole because it's so dangerous, and American soldiers get blown up on roadside bombs, etc., etc. Ghazni 1,000 years ago had there was this whiz kid when he was, I think, 17 years old. He calculated the what do you call it? The circumference of the Earth with 1.5 kilometer discrepancy or something like that. The accuracy of his calculations are absolutely mind blowing. And he was conducting some anthropological studies down the Indian continent for this reason. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. The science that existed back in those times and the knowledge, and we've heard about this with the Romans as well 2,000 years ago, and how they had developed concrete and were building from concrete, and then we lost that knowledge for almost 2,000 years.
Yeah, very good concrete as well.
Yeah,
I think they're starting to use again. I think there was I was just reading an article about the Sumerians and some of the charting that they were doing and how accurate that was as well, and all of these different things that we've kind of taken claim for discovering in the last, whatever it is, 500-600 years, and that it was
and another thing in this, and especially in the last maybe 40 years or so, is that we start to rely on technology, and we stop reading the science of nature. We don't live in the nature anymore. We live in urban environments, and we have technology that tells us everything. We stand outside and we look at the weather app to see if it's raining or not.
Right, yeah. The screen's wet, but
yeah.
Sure, I believe it.
It's idiotic, but we are really getting like that. I love this. It's somewhere in Scotland, I think. There's this weather stone. It's a stone hanging on a rope at the side of a house, and it says, if the stone is wet, it's raining. If the stone is swinging, it's windy.
But it wasn't on Snapchat, so.
No.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, that's going back to Hagia Sophia. I mean, that was one of the things that one of those places that you have to go and visit as a
yes.
As a traveler. Just standing in there and I think it was built in 600.
Yep. 583 or something like that. Yep.
And standing in there thinking, okay, this was built by hand and basic wooden tools and wooden cranes and that side of it.
With that amazing dome, it's absolutely breathtaking.
Yeah, I can't picture how people would do it today if they had to do it without diggers and without without all the tools and reinforcement that we have.
And that's also another thing. I mean, it's of course because of the power of the emperor. He could tell 10,000 people to work on a certain project. And so the man hours that we put into it are insane. And that doesn't happen today. That's also why we don't have art. When you think about buildings, they were pure art. These buildings back in the days. There's nobody building buildings like that today. It's just, the grandest buildings are like in Dubai. Okay, they are very, very tall, but they're not a piece of